This is arguably the most significant financial experiment in human history, yet many individuals remain oblivious to the fact that they are participants. The global debt, encompassing governmental, private, household, and corporate liabilities, has surged to unprecedented heights never witnessed by any civilization before. Nowadays, governments are borrowing trillions of dollars as if it were a trivial matter. Central banks have developed the capability to print money with a mere keystroke. Families are taking out 30-year mortgages as casually as they purchase groceries. Despite this, we persist in discussing debt as if it were an ordinary, harmless, and eternal phenomenon. The reality is far more alarming. Debt has always been a tool of power, a weapon of control, and a ticking time bomb waiting for the right moment to explode. The pressing question is not whether the current mountain of global debt will trigger a crisis, but rather when it will occur and who will ultimately bear the consequences during the system's reset. To grasp how we arrived at this juncture, it is essential to trace back to the origins of debt itself. Debt is as ancient as civilization itself. Some of the earliest clay tablets discovered in Mesopotamia, dating back thousands of years before our era, served not for poetry or philosophy but as accounting records. Fast forward to 1944, a pivotal year marked by the Bretton Woods Conference, where delegates gathered to forge a new financial order for the post-war world. The United States, possessing 2/3 of global gold reserves by war's end, took on a dominant role in setting the rules of this new economic landscape. The US dollar became synonymous with stability, pegged to gold at $35 an ounce, while other currencies linked their value to it as well. The fundamental idea was one of stability. However, reality revealed a different story, one of dependency. Every nation's debt, every government bond issued, and every economic calculation now hinged on the assumption that the United States would maintain fiscal discipline. For a time, this arrangement functioned effectively. Yet, the allure of borrowing, spending beyond one's means, never truly dissipated. By the 1960s, escalating expenditures associated with the Vietnam War and various domestic initiatives prompted the United States to print more dollars than it could back with gold reserves. Foreign governments began taking notice and demanded gold in exchange for American currency. In 1971, President Richard Nixon shut that door firmly, severing the dollar's direct link to gold once and for all. With this decisive action, debt entered an era of unprecedented freedom. Governments could now borrow and print money at will, constrained only by public confidence in their fiscal policies. This watershed moment in 1971 signified a quiet revolution in financial governance. It transformed debt from a finite resource into an almost infinite one. As gold reserves disappeared from consideration, central banks discovered they could manipulate interest rates as tools to steer economic conditions. When growth faltered, lowering interest rates served as an incentive for increased borrowing. Conversely, during times of crisis, governments found themselves compelled to accumulate even greater amounts of debt merely to patch up existing financial holes. Each subsequent bailout required more leverage than its predecessor. This cycle created an intricate web where every financial rescue operation demanded not only immediate funding but also a reevaluation of fiscal strategies moving forward. As nations grappled with their own sets of challenges, be it economic recessions or political instability, the reliance on debt became not just commonplace but essential for survival within a complex global economy interconnected like never before. Thus emerged a reality where managing debt evolved into an art form fraught with risks, yet laden with opportunity, for those willing to navigate its turbulent waters carefully. During the 1980s, under prominent leaders like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, there was a significant escalation in national debt. This expansion was often justified by the necessity for defense measures or ambitious economic reforms. Developing nations eagerly borrowed from Western financial institutions, which ultimately triggered a severe debt crisis in Latin America when these countries found themselves unable to repay those loans. The established model became clear: leverage debt as a means to achieve prosperity, only to face devastation when the tide inevitably recedes. The financial turmoil of 2008 was not merely a housing market issue, as many tend to believe. Rather, it involved layers upon layers of debt, forming a massive pyramid of leverage that was so extensive that when one corner collapsed, the entire structure was shaken to its core. Mortgages were bundled into securities and sold off to investors, insured through derivatives, and amplified with staggering leverage ratios sometimes reaching 30 to 1. This catastrophic failure obliterated banks, decimated pension funds, and compelled governments to intervene with trillions of dollars in bailout packages. The bitter irony of this situation lay in the fact that those who had recklessly accrued debts were rescued from their folly while ordinary citizens faced rampant unemployment, loss of homes through foreclosure, and harsh austerity measures. Debt emerged not as a neutral tool but rather as a mechanism designed to preserve the interests of the affluent elite. Since then, the figures reflecting global debt have transformed from alarming metrics into surreal statistics. Over the past 2 decades, global indebtedness has tripled, soaring past $300 trillion by the year 2023. To put this into perspective, this sum is nearly 4 times larger than the total value of the world economy. Every sector, governments, corporations, households, has taken on immense burdens. In certain countries like Japan, governmental debt levels now exceed 200% of gross domestic product, GDP. Meanwhile, the United States continues accumulating trillions annually with little public discourse on the implications of such spending. Emerging economies are also borrowing heavily in foreign currencies, exposing themselves to sudden crashes if interest rates rise unexpectedly. The entire financial framework has become an intricate balancing act where stability hinges upon the illusion that debt can perpetually escalate without dire repercussions. Yet history demonstrates that debt invariably carries consequences. It distorts behavior by incentivizing risky financial practices. It gives rise to economic bubbles that can burst catastrophically. It redistributes wealth in ways that often exacerbate inequality. Most critically, it ensnares future generations into cycles of repayment. Each dollar borrowed today represents a claim against tomorrow's labor force and productivity. When these amounts spiral out of control, repayment becomes an insurmountable challenge. Consequently, history is rife with stories of defaults, restructurings, rampant inflationary periods, and recurring crises, each serving as a poignant reminder of the perils associated with unchecked borrowing and financial mismanagement across ages and borders. These tablets documented who owed what to whom, how much grain was borrowed, and how many livestock were on loan. In these early societies, debt transcended mere economic function. It held sacred significance. Priests and kings maintained dominion over debts, collecting payments and occasionally forgiving them during large-scale jubilees, occasions when obligations were annulled to avert public disorder. Imagine for a moment the concept that societal survival hinges upon pressing the reset button on a financial system. While debt can confer power, excessive debt breeds peril. Debt ultimately concludes in one of 3 ways. You either repay it honestly, inflate it away, or declare bankruptcy. No empire, no system has ever successfully sidestepped this fundamental truth. The repercussions of this reality are visible all around us. Yet many people remain oblivious to them, as debt has become an unseen burden. Consider this: when your government runs a deficit, it does not knock on your door asking for money. Instead, it issues bonds, selling these financial instruments to banks or foreign investors while quietly racking up a tab in your name. When you swipe your credit card, you are not making a payment. Rather, you are accruing more debt. Often when corporations boast about record profits, much of that increase is fueled by borrowed funds used for stock buybacks. This intricate system thrives on leverage, which behaves much like gravity, seemingly weightless on the way up but crushingly heavy on the descent. Today, the entire financial framework rests upon promises that may never be fulfilled. Take the United States as an example, the cornerstone of the global economy. By 2024, its national debt is expected to soar past $34 trillion. This figure is so staggering that it becomes abstract to many. However, if we translate it into tangible terms, every taxpayer carries obligations amounting to hundreds of thousands of dollars. The interest payments alone have now reached levels comparable to defense spending. This situation indicates that the largest superpower in the world borrows merely to cover interest on previously accumulated debts. This phenomenon is not isolated. Across Europe, nations such as Italy and Greece continue to grapple with a debt-to-GDP ratio significantly exceeding 100%. Meanwhile, in China, explosive debt growth lurks within local governments and state-owned enterprises, masking shadow liabilities that could be far greater than what official statistics reveal. Debt is pervasive and spreading like a malignancy. The trap created by this situation is not solely financial. It also has profound psychological implications. Politicians have a penchant for accruing debt because it grants them precious time. Raising taxes tends to annoy voters while cutting spending provokes even greater dissatisfaction. Conversely, borrowing appears painless at first glance. Future generations will handle it, they believe. This illusion can persist until it suddenly shatters. As interest rates rise, the weight of this burden becomes immediately apparent. This shift began in 2022 when central banks started increasing rates in an effort to combat inflationary pressures. Suddenly, the cost of servicing existing debt surged dramatically. Governments found themselves grappling with tighter budgets while households faced soaring mortgage payments. In this landscape of rising expenses and tightening finances, individuals and families must navigate an increasingly precarious situation where their economic stability hangs by a thread. With each passing day, the reality of living under an immense mountain of debt reveals itself more starkly. An unsettling reminder of how interconnected our financial lives have become with broader economic forces beyond our control. As we look ahead, understanding this intricate web of obligations may prove essential for both policymakers and citizens alike as they navigate these turbulent waters together. Corporations are facing a dramatic surge in refinancing costs. Debt resembles a dormant predator, innocuous while it slumbers, yet lethal once it awakens. Despite escalating risks, debt continues to be marketed as the pathway to prosperity. Students are encouraged to take on substantial loans, often amounting to tens of thousands of dollars, for degrees that may or may not yield a return on investment. Families are told to pursue housing options that stretch their budgets to the breaking point, as property values perpetually rise. Nations are advised that deficits are inconsequential because central banks have the capacity to print limitless currency. This represents one of the grand deceptions of contemporary finance. The notion that debt is free, infinite, and secure. The historical narrative screams an entirely different reality. Predicting what lies ahead is not difficult for those familiar with economic history. When debt accumulates beyond manageable levels, few avenues for relief remain. One potential solution is inflation, a silent erosion of debt value through currency devaluation. This phenomenon is already unfolding before our eyes. As prices escalate by 10%, savings simultaneously lose 10% of their purchasing power. However, government debt diminishes proportionately in real terms. This acts as a hidden tax and is politically more palatable than a default scenario. Another avenue is restructuring, acknowledging an inability to meet repayment obligations and renegotiating terms with creditors. We witnessed this during Greece's crisis in the Eurozone when bondholders were compelled to accept losses as part of the restructuring process. The third alternative involves outright default, a complete refusal to honor debts. History is replete with instances of sovereign defaults, from Argentina to Russia, each time stirring significant unrest within financial markets and societies alike. Ancient rulers understood what modern leaders conveniently overlook. One cannot indefinitely subjugate a population through obligations alone. Eventually, any system becomes untenable and collapses under its own weight. Fast forward to the Renaissance period when banking families like the Medicis flourished in Florence. Here, debt evolved from being measured in grains and livestock to being quantified in gold and credit lines. Monarchs and popes borrowed immense sums to wage wars, construct cathedrals, and finance burgeoning empires. None of these outcomes come without pain. They all represent forms of broken promises that carry heavy consequences for individuals and economies alike. So where do we find ourselves headed? All indicators suggest that inflation may emerge as the favored path forward. Central banks may feign efforts to combat it, yet heavily indebted governments find themselves relying on inflationary pressures to ease their burdens. They require a reduction in real value to render their obligations more manageable, which ultimately means ordinary citizens like you will bear the brunt of these losses. Your savings, your wages, and your future purchasing power will gradually erode in favor of maintaining the existing financial system. This tactic is one of the oldest tricks in the book. Nevertheless, people repeatedly fall victim to it time and again. Inflation creeps along insidiously because numerical increases feel abstract and distant from daily realities. Moreover, the system has conditioned us to believe that debt belongs solely to others. It's an external problem far removed from our own lives. Yet here lies a crucial realization. Debt transcends mere economics. It embodies power dynamics as well. Who extends credit? Who borrows? And who receives bailouts when crises unfold? Understanding these relationships sheds light on how deeply intertwined our lives are with systemic financial practices and highlights why we must remain vigilant about the implications of rising debt levels, not just for ourselves but for society at large. As we navigate this complex landscape shaped by fiscal policies and market forces, it's imperative to recognize our roles within this framework and advocate for transparency and accountability in financial dealings that affect us all. The financial system is structured in such a way that when debt becomes overwhelming, those in power rarely bear the burden of repayment. Instead, it is the banks that receive bailouts, corporations undergo restructuring, and politicians gracefully retire from their roles. Meanwhile, ordinary individuals face the harsh reality of losing their homes, jobs, and hope for the future. This stark contrast highlights why comprehending debt is not merely an academic exercise. It is a matter of survival. Understanding the implications of debt is crucial. Each dollar borrowed comes with its own set of consequences that extend far beyond mere numbers on a balance sheet. Recognizing this reality requires us to discard any lingering illusions we may hold about the neutrality of debt. History has shown us an undeniable pattern. No empire, nation, or economic system has been able to escape the repercussions of accumulating debt. The timelines may vary, yet the eventual outcome remains consistent across all cases. To shield oneself from this inevitable cycle, proactive measures must be taken. This does not mean succumbing to panic or burying gold in one's backyard as a misguided form of security. Rather, it involves the creation of genuine wealth, assets that retain value through various economic cycles. Such assets are complemented by knowledge that can pierce through deception and a perspective that guards against falling prey to familiar traps. As history has taught us repeatedly, the system will persist in recycling these patterns. Debt accumulates while leaders deny reality, crises emerge, and societies undergo renewal processes. The essential choice we face is whether to confront this cyclical nature blindly or with awareness and preparation. By understanding the potential pitfalls that lie ahead, one can avoid becoming a casualty of circumstances beyond their control. The global debt crisis transcends mere figures represented in spreadsheets. It casts a long shadow over our collective future. Without heeding past lessons and adapting accordingly, we risk facing consequences akin to those suffered by every civilization before us that failed to respect these warnings. Should this insight shift your perspective on such issues significantly, it's imperative to delve deeper into history's teachings to uncover where solutions might lie. In doing so, you empower yourself with knowledge and resilience against future challenges posed by economic uncertainties. The path forward requires vigilance and wisdom derived from understanding how historical precedents shape our current landscape. Only then can we hope to navigate through turbulent waters without being swept away by forces we did not foresee or understand fully. However, this reliance on debt was fraught with risk. For instance, Spain, flush with silver from the New World, declared bankruptcy 4 times during the 16th century because its crown borrowed beyond its means. This illustrates an essential lesson. Even empires overflowing with wealth can drown in debts when ambitions outpace reality. Debt transformed into something larger than personal obligation. It became intertwined with geopolitical dynamics. It ignited wars, toppled dynasties, and redrew maps across continents. As history unfolded further, nations began wielding debt not just as an instrument for growth but also as a strategic weapon against rivals. Countries would extend loans to allies while simultaneously rendering adversaries vulnerable through crippling financial obligations. This intricate dance of fiscal maneuvering led to alliances forged not merely on mutual interests but also on economic dependencies that could shift overnight. In contemporary times, we find ourselves navigating a complex web where national debts accumulate at an alarming rate while citizens grapple with their own financial burdens. The cycle repeats itself. Governments promise prosperity fueled by borrowed funds, while households face mounting pressures from loans that seem insurmountable. This intricate tapestry woven from threads of ambition and desperation raises fundamental questions about sustainability. Eventually, society must confront the uncomfortable truth that unchecked borrowing creates an illusion of stability while sowing seeds for future crises that may arise unexpectedly yet inevitably. History serves as our guide. Lessons from past civilizations remind us that ignoring warning signs leads only to catastrophic outcomes down the line. Thus begins another chapter in humanity's ongoing struggle with debt, a narrative filled with both perilous risks and tantalizing opportunities awaiting those willing to navigate its complexities judiciously. The contemporary surge in debt can be traced back to the 20th century, a period marked by significant economic turmoil. Following the conclusion of the First World War, nations were burdened with such colossal debts that the prospect of repayment seemed utterly unattainable. Germany, in particular, faced insurmountable reparations imposed by the Treaty of Versailles, obligations so severe that economists of that era warned they would destabilize the nation. Their foresight proved accurate. The hyperinflation that plagued Germany in the early 1920s left citizens hauling wheelbarrows full of paper marks just to purchase basic food items like bread. This financial catastrophe etched deep scars on the national psyche and laid the groundwork for policies that ultimately contributed to the outbreak of the Second World War. Debt transformed from a mere accounting issue into a catalyst for widespread chaos.